My name is Margot, and am 23 years old. I was standing in the leasing office of what was supposed to be my first real apartment when the manager looked up from her computer screen with an expression I'll never forget. She slid a piece of paper across the desk toward me, and my stomach dropped. There, in black and white, was my credit report showing a score of 510 and a $45,000 auto loan I never took out. My hand started shaking as I stared at the address listed on the loan application, my childhood home in Sacramento. The phone in my pocket buzzed. Mom calling. Again. Before we dive into how my entire life fell apart because of the people who were supposed to protect me, I want to know where you're watching from. Drop your city or country in the comments below. And if you've ever dealt with family betrayal or financial abuse, hit that like button so I know I'm not alone in this. Subscribe because trust me, this story is going to take you on a wild ride through manipulation, fraud, and ultimately, survival. Now, let me tell you exactly how I discovered that my parents had been systematically destroying my future while I was busy trying to build one. I sat in my car outside that leasing office for what felt like hours, but was probably only 20 minutes. My entire body was trembling, and I couldn't catch my breath properly. Let me back up and give you some context about who I am and how I got here. I had just graduated from college 8 months earlier with a degree in graphic design. I'd worked my way through school with 3 part-time jobs, graduated debt-free thanks to scholarships and sheer determination, and landed a position as a junior graphic designer at a small firm in Portland. For 2 solid years, I had been saving every spare dollar I could squeeze out of my modest salary. I ate ramen more nights than I cared to admit. I walked instead of taking the bus. I cut my own hair in my bathroom mirror. All of that sacrifice was for one singular goal: independence. I wanted my own place, a space that was mine, where I could finally feel like an adult who had her life together. I had saved up $3,200 for the security deposit and first month's rent on a cute studio apartment in a safe neighborhood. That morning, I had walked into the leasing office with such hope and excitement, ready to sign the papers and get the keys to my future. Instead, I got a credit report that looked like it belonged to someone who'd spent the last year and a half making catastrophically bad financial decisions. I forced myself to take out my phone with shaking hands and call the credit bureau. The automated system transferred me 3 times before I finally got a human being on the line. The agent, a woman with a kind voice that somehow made everything worse, confirmed what I already knew, but desperately didn't want to believe. There was an auto loan in my name for $45,000, taken out 18 months ago. The payments had been made sporadically for the first 6 months, just enough to keep it from immediately defaulting, and then they had stopped completely. Now the account was drowning in late fees and penalty interest, and my credit score had plummeted from 720 to 510. The address on the loan application was my parents' house, the place where I grew up in Sacramento. I asked the agent to repeat the information twice because my brain couldn't process what I was hearing. This couldn't be real. This had to be some kind of mistake. Identity theft by a stranger. Something that could be fixed with a few phone calls and police reports. But then I remembered something. It was Christmas break during my sophomore year of college. I had driven home to spend the holidays with my family, and my parents had asked me to sign some papers. Dad had called them insurance documents. Something about updating the family health coverage to include me while I was still a dependent. Mom had stood there with her reassuring smile, the one that always made me feel safe, and said it was just a formality, sweetie. Nothing to worry about. I had been tired from finals, distracted by holiday excitement, and I trusted them completely. Why wouldn't I? They were my parents. So I signed where they told me to sign, barely glancing at the papers, and then we all went out for dinner to celebrate my good grades. That memory now felt like poison in my veins. They had manipulated me. They had either forged additional signatures, or they had lied to me about what I was actually signing, and I had been too naive and trusting to protect myself. I drove straight to the public library, because I was too shaken to go into work. I needed a quiet place to think, to understand the full scope of what had been done to me. I pulled up my complete credit report on one of the library computers, and felt my heart sink further with every line I read. The loan was for a luxury SUV, $45,000 for a vehicle I had never seen, never driven, never even known existed. The payment history showed irregular deposits for 6 months, then nothing. My credit score hadn't just dropped, it had been obliterated. Every future landlord, every potential lender, every background check for the rest of my life would see this disaster and judge me for it. I scrolled through my memories, trying to remember if there had been any other signs, any other moments when my parents had asked me to sign things or provide personal information. How deep did this betrayal go? Was this the only loan? Or were there others I hadn't discovered yet? My phone rang, and Mom's name lit up the screen. My hands were still shaking, but now they were shaking with rage instead of shock. I answered the call, and before she could launch into whatever cheerful small talk she had planned, I cut her off. My voice came out strangled and too loud, and an elderly woman at a nearby computer looked over at me with concern. "Why is there a $45,000 loan in my name?" I demanded. There was a long, heavy silence on the other end of the line. I could hear Mom breathing, could almost see her expression shifting from surprise to defensive. When she finally spoke, her tone had changed completely. The warmth was gone, replaced by something sharp and guilt-inducing. "We were going to tell you eventually," she said, as if that made any of this acceptable. "Your father needed reliable transportation for work," she continued, and I felt my blood pressure spike. "After everything we've done for you, raising you, paying for your braces when you were 12, buying you that laptop for college." The list went on and on, every small kindness from my childhood reframed as a debt I owed them. Dad grabbed the phone from her, and his voice was gruff and completely unapologetic. "Family helps family," he said flatly. "Time you learned that, Margot." Then he hit me with the real bombshell. He expected me to start making the monthly payments on this loan I never authorized. $800 a month. I was making barely $2,000 a month after taxes at my entry-level design job. $800 would leave me with almost nothing for food, transportation, or any kind of life. I told him he was insane. I told him this was fraud. I told him I was going to report this to the police. Dad laughed, actually laughed, and said, "Good luck getting anyone to believe your own parents would do this to you." Then he hung up on me. I sat there in the library bathroom, locked in a stall, sobbing so hard I thought I might throw up. The people who were supposed to love me unconditionally had just ruined my life for a car. I spent that entire night, unable to sleep, lying on my friend Harper's couch, and staring at the ceiling, trying to make sense of how my family had arrived at this point. See, this wasn't just a random act of financial fraud. This was the culmination of a family dynamic that had been broken for as long as I could remember. I have an older brother named Garrett. He's 28 now, 5 years older than me, and for our entire lives, he has been the golden child who could do no wrong. When Garrett wanted to go to a private college, my parents paid his full tuition without blinking. When he wanted a car at 16, they bought him one. When he needed an apartment deposit after graduation, they handed over the money. Garrett has never had to struggle for anything, never had to work 3 jobs to make ends meet, never had to choose between eating lunch and saving $5. Meanwhile, I was always the responsible one, the one who didn't need help, the one who could figure things out on her own. I worked my way through state school because my parents said they couldn't afford to help me the way they helped Garrett. I graduated debt-free, but only because I sacrificed my health, my social life, and any semblance of fun during those 4 years. And what has Garrett done with all that support and investment? He's currently living in our parents' basement, unemployed for the past 2 years. Mom and Dad make endless excuses for him. He's finding himself, they say. The economy is tough, they say. He's going through a hard time and needs family support. But when I was going through hard times, when I was working overnight shifts and surviving on vending machine snacks, they told me I needed to toughen up and learn self-reliance. The double standard was so obvious it hurt, but I had always told myself it didn't matter. I didn't need their help. I was strong enough to make it on my own. Except now, I was realizing that while I was busy being strong and independent, they were busy destroying my credit and my future for the benefit of my useless brother. I grabbed my laptop and pulled up my parents' social media accounts, something I rarely did because their constant bragging about Garrett always made me feel inadequate. And there it was, posted exactly 18 months ago. A photo of Garrett standing beside a gleaming black Range Rover, arms crossed, wearing sunglasses and a smug smile. The caption from Mom read, "So proud of our boy and his new ride!" Exclamation point. Heart emoji. Car emoji. 47 likes from relatives and family friends. Comments gushing about how handsome he looked, how successful he must be, how proud the family must feel. I felt like I was going to be sick. The SUV, the $45,000 loan in my name. It was for Garrett. They had stolen my identity to buy my brother a luxury car he didn't need and couldn't afford, and now they expected me to pay for it because family helps family. The hypocrisy was staggering. I had barely processed this information when my phone started exploding with text messages. Apparently, Mom and Dad had called every single member of our extended family to tell their version of events, painting themselves as the victims, and me as an ungrateful, selfish daughter who was attacking them over money. Aunt Francine, Dad's sister, sent a long text about how heartbroken my parents were by my accusations. Cousin Derek chimed in with, "Family doesn't turn on family over money." Uncle Randall, who had always thought was reasonable, sent a message, saying they sacrificed everything for you kids. The least you can do is help them in their time of need. Even my grandmother Loretta got involved, leaving me a voicemail in her stern, judgmental tone telling me to respect my parents and stop being a selfish young lady. Not a single person asked for my side of the story. Not one member of my extended family thought to call me and say, "Hey, what's actually going on here? Are you okay?" They all just automatically believed my parents' narrative and fell into line to attack me. This is what happens in dysfunctional families. There's always a scapegoat. And I was it. I had always been it. I was just too busy trying to earn their approval to notice. I called Harper because I needed to hear from someone who wasn't insane. Someone who existed outside my family's twisted reality. Harper picked up on the first ring, and as soon as I started explaining what happened, she got furious on my behalf. "Margot, this is identity theft," she said firmly. "This is fraud. What they did is a literal crime, and you need to report it right now." She validated everything I was feeling, told me I wasn't crazy, or selfish, or ungrateful, and offered me her couch for as long as I needed it. For the first time in 24 hours, I felt like maybe I could survive this. But my parents weren't done. They launched a full-scale guilt campaign that intensified with every passing hour. Mom started sending me multiple emails per day with subject lines like, "How to Betray Your Parents, 101, and "The Daughter I Thought I Raised." Each email was a novel-length dissertation on every single thing they had ever done for me. From changing my diapers as a baby, to buying me a prom dress in high school. She listed everything in excruciating detail, as if she had been keeping a running tally my entire life just waiting for the moment she could cash in. Dad took a different approach and actually sent me an itemized invoice. I'm not joking. He created a spreadsheet with 18 years' worth of estimated child-rearing expenses, and claimed I owed them $127,000 for the privilege of being born and raised. The audacity was breathtaking. Garrett, of course, joined the pile-on. He sent me a text calling me selfish and entitled, saying I was abandoning the family in their time of need. Then he posted on Facebook about ungrateful siblings who turn their backs on family. And even though he didn't name me directly, everyone knew exactly who he was talking about. My friends started asking me questions. Former classmates sent concerned messages. The humiliation compounded the betrayal in ways I hadn't anticipated. Just when I thought things couldn't get worse, my parents decided to go nuclear. Mom posted a lengthy essay on Facebook that painted her as a heartbroken mother, abandoned by her cruel daughter. She wrote about how she and Dad had sacrificed their dreams and their financial security to raise me and Garrett, how they had given us everything, and how now that they were facing desperate financial hardship, I had turned my back on them in their darkest hour. She didn't mention the fraud. She didn't mention the loan in my name. She didn't mention Garrett's Range Rover, or the fact that had been unemployed and living rent-free in their house for 2 years. She just painted this picture of saintly parents being victimized by an ungrateful millennial who cared more about money than family. The post went semi-viral in our hometown community. Family, friends, church members, neighbors, people I'd known my entire childhood, all started commenting, "Shame on Margot. This is what's wrong with young people today. Whatever happened to family values?" Some people tagged me directly in the comments, as if I needed to see their judgment up close and personal. The worst part was that my boss saw the posts. Mr. Lawson, the senior partner at my graphic design firm, was Facebook friends with my mom through some mutual connection I'd forgotten about. He called me into his office on a Thursday afternoon, and I knew from his expression that something was wrong. He asked me if everything was okay with my family, mentioned that had seen some concerning posts online, and suggested that maybe I should take some time to work things out. I tried to explain the situation, tried to tell him about the fraud and the identity theft, but I could see in his eyes that he was uncomfortable with the whole conversation. Our firm worked with high-profile clients who valued discretion and professionalism, and here I was, apparently embroiled in messy family drama that was playing out on social media. He didn't fire me, but he made it clear that this was reflecting poorly on my judgment and professionalism. My coworkers started treating me differently too, whispering when I walked by, giving me sympathetic looks that made me want to scream. Then someone, I'm still not entirely sure who, but I have my suspicions. Sent an anonymous email to my company's HR department and several senior partners. The email included screenshots of my credit report, details about the loan, and insinuations that I was involved in some kind of financial or legal trouble that made me a liability to the firm. I was called into Mr. Lawson's office again, this time with the HR director present. They showed me printed copies of the email and asked me directly if I was in any kind of legal trouble. I felt humiliated having to explain that I was actually the victim of fraud, that my own parents had stolen my identity to take out a loan for my brother's car, and that I had filed a police report just 2 days earlier. I brought documentation. I showed them the police report number. I explained the timeline in excruciating detail. Mr. Lawson seemed sympathetic, but he was also clearly concerned about potential drama affecting the company. He told me that while they believed I was handling the situation appropriately, they were going to put me on probationary status pending full resolution of the matter. My salary was frozen. The bonus I'd been counting on to rebuild my savings was cancelled. I was now struggling financially and professionally because of something I didn't do, something that had been done to me by the people who were supposed to love me most in this world. My extended family doubled down on their attacks. My cousin Marcus, who happens to be a lawyer though not a particularly good one, sent me an official-looking letter on his firm's letterhead. The letter claimed that I was slandering my parents by calling their actions fraud, and it threatened me with a defamation lawsuit if I didn't immediately retract the police report and issue a public apology. I knew enough about the law to know this was nonsense. Truth is an absolute defense against defamation, and everything I'd said about my parents was provably true. But the letter still scared me, because legal threats always sound intimidating, even when they're baseless. Aunt Francine somehow got my landlord's contact information. I had listed her as a reference months ago when I first moved to Portland, back when I still thought my family was normal and functional. She called my landlord and told him I was financially irresponsible and mentally unstable, that I was making wild accusations against my loving parents, and that he should be careful about keeping me as a tenant. My landlord, a nervous man in his 60s who didn't want any kind of trouble, gave me a 30-day notice to vacate. Just like that, I was losing my apartment. Garrett, in a move that was vindictive even by his standards, posted my phone number on some online forum with a caption encouraging people to call and tell me what they thought about ungrateful children. I started receiving dozens of calls and texts from strangers harassing me, calling me names, telling me I was going to hell. I had to change my phone number, which meant updating all my professional contacts, my bank, my utilities, everything. The administrative nightmare was almost as exhausting as the emotional trauma. I thought I had reached the bottom, but my parents were determined to dig deeper. 2 weeks after the social media smear campaign, I went to withdraw money from my checking account to pay rent and buy groceries, only to discover that the account had been frozen. I called my bank in a panic, and the customer service representative explained that there had been suspicious activity flagged on my account, and that someone had filed a claim alleging fraud. That someone was my parents. They had gone to my bank, which happened to be the same bank they used, and filed a formal complaint claiming that I had stolen money from them. As evidence, they provided old checks I had written to them years ago when I was living at home during college and contributing to household expenses. They claimed those checks were actually loans they had given me, loans I had never repaid, and therefore they had a right to freeze my account and reclaim what was owed. The bank, following standard procedure for fraud investigations, froze my entire account pending a full investigation that would take 45 to 60 days to complete. 45 to 60 days. I had $3,200 in that account, which was every penny I had saved. My rent was due in 1 week. My car payment was due. I needed groceries. I needed gas. And I couldn't access a single dollar of my own money. I sat in my car in the bank parking lot and had a full-blown panic attack. My chest felt tight. I couldn't breathe properly. My vision was tunneling. A bank employee came out to check on me and asked if I needed her to call an ambulance, and I just shook my head and tried to force air into my lungs. When I finally calmed down enough to think semi-clearly, I realized I needed to use my credit card for basic survival until this nightmare got sorted out. Except when I tried to use my card at the grocery store that evening, it was declined. I called the credit card company from the parking lot, standing next to my car with a cart full of food I couldn't buy, and learned that someone had reported my card as stolen. The recent charges on the account, which were all legitimate purchases I had made, had been disputed as unauthorized. The credit card company had canceled my card and launched an investigation. I asked who had reported it stolen, but they couldn't tell me due to privacy policies. But I knew. Of course I knew. My parents had access to enough of my personal information to call and claim they were me. Or maybe they'd filed some kind of third-party fraud report. Either way, I now had no access to credit, and no access to cash. I tried to apply for a new credit card, thinking maybe I could at least get a small limit to cover emergencies. Denied due to my destroyed credit score. I tried to apply for a personal loan from an online lender. Denied for the same reason. I was completely financially paralyzed. Harper loaned me $500, bless her heart. But she was a graduate student, living on a tiny stipend, and that was literally all she could spare. I started eating one meal a day to make that money stretch. I bought the cheapest food I could find, mostly rice and beans and ramen noodles. I lost 8 pounds in 2 weeks, not from any intentional diet but from pure stress and food insecurity. My clothes started hanging loose on my frame. Dark circles appeared under my eyes from lack of sleep and proper nutrition. Coworkers noticed and asked if I was okay, and I lied and said I was just fighting off a cold. The truth was too humiliating to admit. How do you tell people that your own parents are systematically destroying your life and you're powerless to stop them? Then the job situation got even worse. I had applied for a better-paying position at a tech startup a few weeks earlier, before everything exploded. It was a significant step up, more money, better benefits, more creative freedom. The interview had gone brilliantly. The hiring manager loved my portfolio and told me I was their top candidate. I was so excited, thinking that maybe this new job could be my lifeline out of the financial disaster my parents had created. Then I got the rejection email. Thank you for your interest, but we've decided to move forward with other candidates. I called the hiring manager directly, desperate to understand what had gone wrong, and after some awkward hesitation, she admitted that I hadn't passed their background check. When I pressed for details, she said they had received information about concerning financial irregularities and potential legal issues. Someone had sent them an anonymous tip about the loan, about the fraud allegations, probably included screenshots and documents to make it look like I was the one committing fraud, rather than being the victim of it. The company didn't want to take on what they perceived as legal entanglements, so they went with a safer candidate. My career advancement was being sabotaged along with everything else. That night, my dad called me from a number I didn't recognize. His voice was cold and threatening in a way I'd never heard before. "Make this right, Margot," he said. "Drop the fraud charges, start making the loan payments, and apologize to your mother publicly for the hurt you've caused, or things are going to get much worse for you." I asked him how things could possibly get worse than they already were. He laughed, and the sound made my skin crawl. "You have no idea what we're capable of," he said. Then he hung up. I sat there in Harper's apartment, staring at my phone, and realized with crystal clarity that this wasn't just about money or a car anymore. This was about control. My parents were terrorizing me because I had dared to stand up to them, dared to say no, dared to suggest that what they did was wrong. They were going to punish me until I broke and submitted to their will. This was coordinated, calculated, psychological warfare. Just when I thought I had hit absolute rock bottom, my brother Garrett texted me out of the blue. "Can we talk? Just us?" he wrote. "I feel really guilty about everything that's happened, and I want to help." I stared at that message for a long time, trying to decide if it was genuine or another trap. Part of me desperately wanted to believe that Garrett still had some shred of decency, that he felt remorse for his role in all this chaos. We met at a coffee shop halfway between Portland and Sacramento. He was already there when I arrived, sitting at a corner table, looking nervous and uncomfortable. When I sat down, he immediately launched into an apology. He said he didn't know Mom and Dad had taken out the loan in my name, that Head thought they were just helping him buy a car with their own money. He claimed he only found out about the fraud recently, and felt terrible about it. He looked me straight in the eye and said he wanted to make things right, that he knew our parents had gone too far, and that he wanted to help me figure out how to fix this mess. I wanted so badly to believe him. Garrett and I hadn't been close in years. The golden child and scapegoat dynamic had driven a wedge between us, but he was still my brother. I thought maybe this crisis could actually bring us together, could make him finally see how unfairly our parents had treated me my whole life. So I opened up to him. I showed him all my evidence, the police report number, the fraud affidavit Eid filed, the communications from my lawyer, the timeline of events. I told him about the financial sabotage, the frozen bank account, the canceled credit card, the job offer Id lost. I even told him I was seeing a therapist to deal with the trauma and anxiety. Garrett took notes on his phone, asked thoughtful questions, seemed genuinely concerned and remorseful. When we said goodbye in the parking lot, he hugged me tight and said, "We're siblings. I got your back." I drove home feeling lighter than I had in weeks, thinking maybe I wasn't completely alone in this nightmare after all. 2 days later, I got a call from the police detective assigned to my identity theft case. My parents had filed a counter-complaint accusing me of harassment and extortion. They claimed I was blackmailing them, threatening to ruin their reputation and make false fraud accusations unless they gave me money. As evidence, they had provided screenshots of text messages I'd sent them. But the texts were taken wildly out of context and edited to make me look vindictive and malicious. Messages where I'd written, "You owe me for what you did, and this needs to be made right," were presented as proof of extortion, rather than legitimate demands for accountability. The detective was now questioning whether this was actually a criminal matter or just a messy civil dispute between family members. The certainty in his voice from our first conversation was gone, replaced by skepticism and caution. I felt my heart sinking as I realized what had happened. I checked my phone and found the evidence I'd been dreading. Garrett had screenshotted our entire coffee shop conversation. Every piece of evidence I'd shown him, every vulnerable thing I'd shared, had captured and sent straight to our parents. There was even a photo someone had taken of us sitting together at the coffee shop, presented as proof that Garrett and I were conspiring together to defraud our elderly parents. The narrative they were spinning was insane but just plausible enough to create doubt. They were claiming that Garrett and I had cooked up this whole fraud accusation together as a scheme to steal money from them, that we were the real criminals trying to victimize our poor innocent parents. It was projection at its finest, accusing me of exactly what they had done to me, and my own brother had helped them do it. I called Garrett immediately, my hands shaking with rage and betrayal. He answered on the third ring, and I could hear the smirk in his voice before he even spoke. "Did you really think I'd choose you over Mom and Dad?" he said with a laugh. "They're the ones who take care of me, who pay my bills, who actually support family. You've always been the stuck-up one who thought she was better than us." He admitted that our parents had promised to pay off his credit card debt, which had apparently ballooned to over $12,000, if he helped them gather evidence against me. The coffee shop meeting had been a setup from the start. Then he dropped the final bomb. The Range Rover was his. It had always been his. It was registered in my name for insurance purposes, because his driving record was terrible, and the insurance would have been astronomical in his own name. Had been driving that car for 18 months, enjoying his luxury vehicle while I paid the price in destroyed credit and financial ruin. "You were always the smart one, the successful one," he said mockingly. "Time for you to actually be useful to this family for once." Then he hung up on me. I sat on the floor of Harper's bathroom and cried until I had no tears left. This wasn't just my parents betraying me anymore. This was my brother, the person I'd shared a childhood with, actively participating in my destruction for the price of $12,000 in credit card debt. Had looked me in the eyes, hugged me, told me he had my back, all while planning to use everything I told him as ammunition against me. The betrayal cut deeper than anything my parents had done, because some small part of me had hoped Garrett might be different, might be capable of seeing me as a human being worthy of basic decency. But had made his choice, and that choice was to sacrifice me to protect his own comfort and maintain his position as the golden child. The 30-day eviction notice came and went, and I found myself in a position I never imagined possible. I was homeless. Every apartment I applied to rejected me because of my credit score. I tried explaining the situation, showing documentation of the fraud case, but landlords don't want to deal with complications or legal drama. They just want reliable tenants with good credit, and on paper, I looked like a disaster. Harper's lease had a strict policy against long-term guests, and her landlord had already given her a warning when he noticed I'd been staying there too much. I couldn't risk getting her evicted too, so I packed everything I owned into my car, a beat-up Honda Civic that was barely holding together, and started sleeping in the gym parking lot. I'd bought a gym membership specifically because they had showers, and I needed somewhere to maintain basic hygiene for work. Every night, I'd park under a streetlight for safety, recline my seat as far as it would go, and try to sleep while clutching my pepper spray. I kept my work clothes on hangers in the back seat and changed in the gym bathroom stalls every morning, trying desperately to maintain the appearance of someone who had their life together. My coworkers started noticing things. I was wearing the same rotation of 4 outfits over and over, because those were the only work-appropriate clothes I could keep wrinkle-free in my car. I looked exhausted all the time because sleeping in a car is horrible for your body and your mental health. I was jumpy and anxious, constantly worried about being caught or harassed or worse. One of the senior designers asked me point blank if everything was okay at home, and I just mumbled something about going through a tough transition period. Mr. Lawson called me into his office again, and this time his expression was different, less judgmental, more concerned. He asked if I was safe, if I had somewhere to live, if I needed help. I broke down completely. I'd been holding it together through sheer force of will, but his kindness shattered my defenses. I admitted everything. I told him I'd been sleeping in my car for a week because I couldn't find an apartment that would accept me with my destroyed credit. I told him about the fraud, about my family's systematic campaign to destroy my life, about feeling completely powerless and alone. Mr. Lawson did something I didn't expect. He told me the company owned a small studio apartment they kept for visiting contractors and out-of-town clients. It was currently empty, and he could arrange for me to stay there temporarily. The rent would be deducted from my paycheck, which meant less take-home money, but at least I'd have a roof over my head and an address for mail. I accepted immediately, nearly crying with relief. It wasn't much, just a tiny studio with a bed, a bathroom, and a kitchenette. But it was shelter and safety, and I was so grateful I could barely speak. For the first time in weeks, I slept in an actual bed and took a shower without worrying about my gym membership getting flagged for excessive use. But even with that small mercy, my body was starting to give out under the chronic stress. I developed stress-induced hives that covered my arms and neck, angry red welts that itched constantly and made me feel like my skin was trying to escape my body. The migraines started shortly after, blinding pain that would hit me in the middle of the workday and force me to hide in the bathroom with the lights off. I couldn't sleep more than 2 or 3 hours at a time, jolting awake from nightmares about debt collectors or my parents showing up to hurt me, or worse. Food had become an afterthought. I was down to 1 small meal a day because I simply had no money and no appetite. The weight fell off my already small frame. I lost 12 more pounds in 3 weeks, dropping to a weight that made me look skeletal and sick. My hair started falling out in clumps in the shower, the result of malnutrition and extreme stress. I'd find strands on my pillow, in my hairbrush, circling the drain. I looked in the mirror one morning and barely recognized the hollow-eyed, gaunt-faced stranger staring back at me. The panic attack at work was the final warning sign my body could give me before complete shutdown. I was in the middle of a design presentation when my chest suddenly felt like it was being crushed in a vice. I couldn't breathe. The room started spinning. I excused myself, and barely made it to the bathroom before my legs gave out. I collapsed on the tile floor, gasping for air, convinced I was dying. Harper had stopped by the office to take me to lunch and found me there, hyperventilating and unable to speak. She called an ambulance over my weak protests. The ER doctor diagnosed me with severe anxiety, acute malnutrition, and extreme exhaustion. My blood pressure was dangerously low. My electrolytes were severely imbalanced. My body was quite literally shutting down from chronic stress. The doctor looked at me with genuine concern and said if I didn't make major changes immediately, I was going to end up with permanent health damage or worse. He prescribed anxiety medication, sleeping pills, and a whole regimen of vitamin supplements. The medical bill came to $1,800 after insurance. Money I absolutely did not have. The hospital sent it to collections when I couldn't pay. My credit score dropped another 20 points. I sat in that tiny studio apartment 3 days later, staring at the pill bottles lined up on the counter. The anxiety medication, the sleeping pills, the vitamin supplements. I looked at them and thought about how easy it would be to just take all of them at once and make everything stop. The pain, the fear, the humiliation, the betrayal, all of it could just end. Would anyone even care if I disappeared? My parents would probably celebrate because the debt would die with me and they'd be free and clear. Garrett would shrug and go back to his video games. My extended family would probably say something about how I'd always been unstable and it was tragic but not surprising. Only Harper would actually grieve, and she'd be better off without having to support my disaster of a life. I sat there for 3 hours, holding those pill bottles, writing a goodbye note to Harper on my phone. I'm sorry I couldn't be stronger. I'm sorry I let them win. Please don't blame yourself. You were the only good thing in my life and I love you. Thank you for trying to save me. I was literally about to do it when Harper showed up at my door. She had a spare key that Mr. Lawson had given her in case of emergencies, and some instinct had told her to check on me. She walked in, saw the pills in my hand, saw the note on my phone screen, and she grabbed me. She didn't lecture me, or tell me how selfish I was being. She just held me while I sobbed. This horrible, ugly crying that came from somewhere deep in my chest. She called the suicide prevention hotline and stayed on the phone with them while I talked to a counselor. She spent the entire night on my floor, refusing to leave me alone even when I insisted I was fine. "We'll fight this together," she told me firmly. "You're not alone. You have me. And we're going to make sure your parents pay for what they've done." I agreed to start seeing a therapist regularly. This was rock bottom. This was the lowest point of my entire life. But somehow, with Harper refusing to let me give up, I survived it. I had been seeing a therapist for about 2 weeks when my grandmother Loretta called me out of the blue. Her voice was completely different from the stern, judgmental tone Shed used in her earlier voicemail. Now she sounded warm, even apologetic. "Margot, honey, I've been thinking a lot about what happened," she said. "I talked to your parents and I have to say, I think they were wrong to do what they did." My heart skipped a beat. Finally, someone in my family was seeing the truth. Finally, someone was willing to validate my experience and stand up for me. Loretta said Shed had a long conversation with my parents and told them they needed to make this right, that they'd crossed a line and damaged their relationship with me potentially beyond repair. She invited me to lunch, just the two of us, so we could talk privately about how to move forward. I was hesitant at first because I'd been burned so badly by Garrett's fake alliance, but Loretta had always been a strong personality in our family. If anyone could make my parents listen, it was her. We met at a nice restaurant in downtown Portland, the kind of place with white tablecloths and expensive entrees. Loretta was already there when I arrived, and she greeted me with a warm hug that made me want to cry. We ordered food and she spent the first half hour just talking about family history, sharing memories of me as a child, telling me how much Shed always loved me. "You were always my favorite grandchild, you know," she said with a conspiratorial smile. "You had so much fire and independence even as a little girl." I started to relax, started to believe that maybe this was real. Then she offered to help me financially. "I have some savings set aside," she said. "I could loan you money to hire a lawyer, a really good one, who could help you navigate this situation properly." I broke down at the table, right there in the middle of the restaurant. Someone in my family finally cared. Someone finally saw me as a human being worth protecting. I shared everything with her. My legal strategy, the evidence I'd gathered, the next steps my attorney had recommended. I showed her text messages, emails, timelines, everything. The lunch ended with more hugs and promises. Loretta told me she was going to have a serious talk with my parents, and that this nightmare would end soon. She paid for lunch, or at least I thought she did, and sent me on my way with reassurances that everything would be okay. I felt hope for the first time in months. Real, genuine hope that maybe my family wasn't completely broken, that maybe someone with influence could talk sense into my parents and force them to do the right thing. That hope lasted exactly 3 days. Then my parents' lawyer sent me a cease and desist letter that included an audio recording of our lunch conversation. Loretta had recorded everything on her phone, hidden somewhere in her purse, but the recording had been edited, carefully spliced and cut to make me sound vindictive and money-hungry. Parts where I was venting about the pain my parents had caused were cut to sound like threats. "I'll make them pay for this" became just "I'll make them pay." "They're going to regret what they did" became "they'll regret this," with all the context removed. The lawyer's letter claimed I was engaging in a harassment campaign against my parents, that I was plotting revenge, and that they were prepared to seek a restraining order if I didn't stop immediately. Then the restaurant called me. Apparently, Loretta had left without paying the bill. Shed told the server that her granddaughter was treating today, and then slipped out while I was in the bathroom, leaving me with a $340 tab for fancy steaks and wine I'd never agreed to pay for. My card had been declined when they tried to run it because I still had almost no available credit, and now they were threatening to call the police for dining and dashing unless I paid immediately. I had to borrow money from Harper yet again, money she absolutely couldn't afford to lend me, just to keep from getting arrested. When I finally got up the courage to call Loretta and confront her, she didn't even pretend to be sorry. "You're tearing this family apart," she said coldly. "Someone had to stop you before you did irreparable damage." She admitted that my parents had asked her to gather evidence of my supposed instability, to record me saying things they could use against me in court, or with the police. Shed played the role of concerned grandmother perfectly, and I'd fallen for it completely. Her justification was the same delusional reasoning everyone in my family seemed to share. "They're protecting Garrett because he's fragile and he needs support," she said. You're strong, Margot. You've always been strong. You'll survive this, but Garrett wouldn't survive losing his parents' support. I hung up and just sat in stunned silence. My own grandmother had betrayed me. Shed hugged me, told me I was her favorite, offered to help me, all while secretly recording our conversation to use against me. Every single member of my family was participating in this conspiracy. They'd all chosen their sides. And I was the enemy. They'd rather protect Garrett, the unemployed 30-year-old man-child living in a basement, than acknowledge that my parents had committed a crime against me. The realization that I had absolutely no family left, that every single person who shared my blood had either actively hurt me or passively enabled my abuse, was devastating in a way I couldn't fully articulate. I was completely alone, except for Harper and my therapist. My entire family tree had been poisoned, and I was the only branch they were willing to cut off and burn. Everything changed when Juliana approached me at work. She was a senior designer at the firm, someone I'd always admired for her talent and professionalism, but had never really talked to beyond work-related matters. She pulled me aside one afternoon and said Shed overheard some things, specifically Mr. Lawson explaining my situation to the HR director to make sure I continued to have access to the company apartment. "Can we talk privately?" she asked. We went to a coffee shop down the street, and Juliana told me something I never expected to hear. Her parents had done almost exactly the same thing to her 5 years earlier. They'd stolen $30,000 from her, opened credit cards in her name, destroyed her credit, and then launched a family-wide campaign to paint her as the villain when she tried to hold them accountable. "I went through the same hell you're going through right now," she said. "The gaslighting, the flying monkeys, the financial sabotage, all of it. But I fought back, and I won, and you can too." She laid out a clear legal strategy based on what had worked for her. She gave me the name and number of her lawyer, Patricia Reeves, who specialized in family fraud and identity theft cases. "Patricia's not just good," Juliana told me, "she's fierce. She hates cases like this because she understands how much damage family betrayal does. She'll fight for you." Juliana called Patricia right there in the coffee shop and explained my situation. Patricia agreed to take my case pro bono, because she had a personal mission to help victims of family financial abuse. For the first time since this nightmare began, I felt like I had real protection, like someone with actual power and legal knowledge was on my side. Patricia worked fast. Within a week, Shed filed a comprehensive fraud affidavit with all 3 credit bureaus, submitted a detailed identity theft report to the police, with supporting documentation, and initiated a civil lawsuit against my parents for fraud, identity theft, and emotional distress. She filed paperwork to freeze the loan account and dispute the debt, and she started the process of repairing my credit by having the fraudulent accounts marked as disputed and under investigation. Around the same time, I was contacted by a local investigative journalist named Warren Chen. He was working on a story about financial abuse by family members, a hidden epidemic that rarely gets prosecuted because victims are reluctant to press charges against their own parents or siblings. Someone had tipped him off about my case. I later found out it was Harper, who'd contacted the newspaper because she thought public exposure might help protect me and raise awareness. Warren wanted to interview me for his story, and I was terrified. More publicity meant more family rage, more attacks, more opportunities for my parents to twist the narrative, but Patricia encouraged me. "Sunlight is the best disinfectant," she said. "The more people understand that this kind of abuse happens, the harder it is for perpetrators to hide behind family loyalty and keep victimizing people." I agreed to be interviewed on the condition that my name be changed in the article. Warren wrote a powerful piece titled "The Hidden Epidemic: When Parents Commit Fraud Against Their Own Children." My case was featured as Sarah's story, and the article included statistics about how common this type of fraud actually is, how rarely it's prosecuted, and how devastating the impact is on victims. The comments section on the newspaper's website exploded. Hundreds of people shared similar stories of parents, siblings, or other family members stealing their identities, destroying their credit, and then using family loyalty and guilt to avoid consequences. People messaged me privately through the anonymous email Warren had set up, sharing their own nightmares and thanking me for being brave enough to speak up. I realized I wasn't alone, I wasn't crazy, and this pattern of abuse was far more common than anyone wanted to admit. The validation from strangers who understood exactly what I was going through was more healing than I can describe. Meanwhile, Patricia was building an airtight case. She subpoenaed the loan documents and got copies of the original application. A forensic handwriting analyst compared the signatures on the loan paperwork to my actual signature from college documents and confirmed they didn't match. The signatures had been forged. She pulled IP address logs that showed the loan application had been submitted from my parents' home computer on a day when I was provably in Portland at work. She found text messages Garrett had sent to a friend around the time the loan was taken out, bragging about his new ride and how his parents had figured out a way to get him a Range Rover without destroying their own credit. Patricia subpoenaed my parents' bank records and found the smoking gun. The loan money had been deposited into their account and then immediately transferred and spent on the SUV for Garrett, house renovations that added a home theater system to their basement, and a luxury vacation to Las Vegas. None of it had been spent on necessities or emergencies like they'd claimed. This was pure greed and entitlement. The police detective who'd initially been skeptical reopened the investigation with renewed seriousness. He actually apologized to me, admitting he should have taken my report more seriously from the beginning instead of treating it like a family squabble. The district attorney's office began reviewing the case for potential criminal charges including identity theft, fraud, and forgery. My parents were facing real consequences for the first time, and they were panicking. Their lawyers sent multiple settlement offers, trying to get me to drop the charges in exchange for them paying off the loan. Patricia advised me to reject every offer because accepting a settlement would mean letting them avoid criminal prosecution, and they deserved to face the full weight of the law for what they'd done. The court hearing was scheduled for a Thursday morning in late October, almost exactly 1 year after Id first discovered the loan. I walked into that courtroom with Patricia by my side, Harper sitting in the gallery for moral support, and Juliana there too because she'd become a real friend through all of this. My parents arrived with their own lawyer, and they'd brought Garrett, Aunt Francine, and Uncle Randall for what I assume was supposed to be an intimidation tactic. They were all wearing matching navy blue shirts with white text that said "Family First," like they were part of some cult. It would have been funny if it wasn't so pathetic. The judge, a stern woman in her 60s, named Judge Catherine Morrison, reviewed all the evidence Patricia had submitted. My parents' lawyer tried every trick in the book. He claimed this was just a misunderstanding, a family dispute that had been blown out of proportion, that I was an ungrateful child trying to punish my loving parents over a simple mistake. Patricia calmly presented the forensic evidence, the timeline, the financial records, the text messages, everything laid out in excruciating detail. I watched Judge Morrison's face harden as she read through the documents. She asked my parents directly if they had taken out a loan in my name, without my knowledge or consent. Their lawyer tried to answer for them, but the judge cut him off and demanded they answer personally. My father stuttered something about thinking it would be okay because I was family, and my mother started crying and saying they'd just been trying to help Garrett because he needed support. Judge Morrison was not impressed. She issued her ruling with a tone of barely contained disgust. The debt was discharged from my name completely and transferred back to my parents where it belonged. They were ordered to pay compensatory damages for the harm they'd caused to my credit and my mental health, plus all of my legal fees and credit repair costs. She issued a formal restraining order prohibiting any contact with me for a minimum of 5 years, and she referred the case to the district attorney's office with a strong recommendation for criminal prosecution. My mother screamed that I was destroying the family, that I was a vindictive, ungrateful brat who would regret this for the rest of my life. My father shouted that I was dead to them, that they had no daughter anymore. The judge threatened them both with contempt of court charges, and security officers had to escort them out of the courtroom while they were still yelling. 3 months later, my life had begun to stabilize in ways I hadn't thought possible. The fraudulent loan was completely removed from my credit report, and all the negative marks associated with it were disputed and deleted. My credit score was climbing slowly but steadily. I was up to 640 and rising. I found a new apartment. Nothing fancy, but it was mine, paid for with my own money, with a landlord who actually checked my references, instead of just relying on a credit score. Harper helped me move in, and we celebrated with pizza and cheap wine, and I cried happy tears for the first time in over a year. Juliana had become not just a mentor but a genuine friend, someone who understood my trauma because she'd lived through her own version of it. She introduced me to a support group for adult children of narcissistic and abusive parents, and sitting in those meetings listening to other people's stories made me feel less alone than I'd felt in my entire life. At work, Mr. Lawson pulled me aside and told me he was impressed by my resilience and strength through an impossible situation. He promoted me to senior designer with a significant pay increase, and he apologized for not being more supportive earlier in the process. I started therapy twice a week and worked through the trauma, learning terms like scapegoat, golden child, narcissistic family system, and flying monkeys. Understanding the psychology behind what my family had done helped me stop blaming myself for their choices. I learned how to set boundaries without guilt, how to recognize manipulation tactics, how to protect myself from future abuse. I joined a financial literacy workshop and started volunteering to teach young adults how to protect their credit, recognize fraud, and set healthy boundaries with family members who might try to exploit them. Helping others avoid my nightmare gave me a sense of purpose and healing. Garrett was arrested about 6 months after the court hearing for an unrelated fraud scheme. Head apparently tried to scam an elderly couple out of their retirement savings with some fake investment opportunity, and he was dumb enough to use his real name and contact information. My parents bailed him out and hired him an expensive lawyer, continuing to enable his behavior even as their own legal troubles mounted. When I heard about it, I felt nothing. No satisfaction, no sadness, no anger, just a profound sense of being done with all of them. They were living their lives and I was living mine, and those two realities would never intersect again. The DA eventually filed criminal charges against my parents for identity theft and fraud. They pleaded guilty as part of a deal to avoid prison time, receiving probation, community service, and a permanent mark on their criminal records. It wasn't everything I wanted, but it was something. They had faced real consequences, and would have to live with the legal and social ramifications of their actions. 1 year after the court hearing, I was thriving in ways I'd never imagined possible. My credit score had climbed to 680 and was still improving. I had built up a $5,000 emergency fund, something that felt like an impossible luxury after so many months of financial devastation. I'd been promoted again at work, and was leading major design campaigns for high-profile clients. I met someone kind and genuine named Lucas through mutual friends, and he came from a healthy family who welcomed me with open arms. Experiencing what real family support looked like, seeing parents who actually loved their children unconditionally, without expecting anything in return, was both healing and painful. It showed me everything I'd missed growing up, but it also showed me what I deserved and would accept going forward. Harper was still my best friend, the sister I chose, and she was going to be my maid of honor when Lucas and I eventually got married. Juliana remained a close friend and mentor, someone who understood my past and supported my future. My parents sent occasional letters to my work address, since they didn't know where I lived and were prohibited from contacting me directly. The letters were always a bizarre mix of apology and blame, claiming they were sorry but also insisting I'd overreacted and destroyed the family over money. I didn't read them anymore. I just marked them returned to sender and sent them back unopened. My therapist told me she was proud of the boundaries I'd set and maintained, that refusing to engage with their continued manipulation attempts was a sign of true healing. I reflected often on how far I'd come. I hadn't just survived my family's abuse. I'd rebuilt myself into someone stronger and wiser. I was surrounded by chosen family who truly loved me, people like Harper and Juliana and Lucas who showed up for me without expecting anything in return. I had learned that family isn't defined by blood but by who stands beside you when blood relatives tear you down. I spent a quiet evening on my apartment balcony, watching the sunset with a cup of coffee in my hands, and felt genuine peace for the first time in my adult life. Harper texted me, "Proud of you, always." I smiled and texted back, "I'm proud of me too." And I meant it. The journey had been brutal and traumatic in ways I'm still processing, but I'd made it through. Some days were still hard. I still had moments of grief for the family I wish I'd had, moments of anger at the injustice of what they'd done, moments of doubt, where I wondered if I'd made the right choices. My therapist reminded me that healing isn't linear, that it's okay to have bad days, that trauma doesn't disappear just because you've achieved legal victory. But overall, I was free. Free from their manipulation, their guilt trips, their endless demands and toxic dynamics. I'd built a life they said I didn't deserve. Surrounded myself with people who celebrated my successes instead of trying to tear me down. If my story helps even one person recognize the signs of family financial abuse, set boundaries with toxic relatives, or escape their own nightmare situation, then every moment of pain was worth it. I didn't just survive my family's betrayal. I survived the part of myself that wanted to give up, to disappear, to let them win. I chose myself over their dysfunction, and I would make that choice again every single time. I learned that you can't fix people who don't want to be fixed, that sometimes the healthiest thing you can do is walk away from people who refuse to treat you with basic human decency, even if those people are family. I learned that I am stronger than I ever knew, that I deserve love and respect and safety, and that anyone who can't provide those things has no place in my life, regardless of how we're related. I closed my laptop, stood up, and took a deep breath of cool evening air. The girl who'd sat sobbing in a library bathroom. The girl who'd slept in her car. The girl who'd almost given up entirely. She was still part of me, but she wasn't all of me anymore. I was whole now, healed in the ways that matter, and ready to build a future that was entirely my own. So let me ask you, have you ever had to cut off toxic family members to protect yourself? Have you experienced financial abuse or manipulation from people who were supposed to love you? Drop your stories in the comments below because I promise you're not alone, and sharing these experiences helps all of us heal. If this story resonated with you, please hit that like button and subscribe to this channel because your support means everything and helps content like this reach people who desperately need to hear they're not crazy for standing up to family abuse. Share this video with anyone you think might need to hear it, anyone who's struggling with toxic family dynamics or questioning whether they're wrong for setting boundaries. And thank you from the bottom of my heart for listening to my story, for witnessing my pain and my healing, for being part of this community. I hope you find your own peace, your own strength, and your own chosen family who loves you the way you deserve to be loved. Take care of yourselves out there, set those boundaries, and remember that you are worth fighting for.